Good Saturday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for July the 8th. Today, we're reading together the final chapter of the Samson saga here in Judges chapter 16. Hope that you've had a great week. I appreciate you taking some time to read along with me today on this Saturday, again, as we're finishing up our read through the section that talks about Samson. His story is going to be wrapped up today, and it really does conclude the book of the Judges, not what we would know as the book of the Judges, the entire writing, all 21 chapters, but it puts a concluding bow on what is actually talked about those who judged Israel. From here on out, we're just told about the dumpster fire that is the current spiritual state of Israel. It's summarized in chapter 17 and verse number 6, that in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did whatever seemed right to him. Everyone did whatever was right in his own eyes. And it certainly is a very, very sad picture that's painted in the remainder of the text here in the book of Judges. But here in Samuel, or here concerning Samson, at the end of chapter 16, what we're told about the judges themselves does come to a conclusion. Let me get the text up on the screen for us, and we will. Nope, not that. Wrong one. Let's see here, right here. Let me get the text up on the screen, and we'll read together here in Judges chapter 16 and verse number 1. Remember, Samson was a very special child. His birth was announced to his mother by the angel of Yahweh. And we were left thinking that this is going to be a beginning of a change within Israel, that they're going to go from no longer being under the thumb of oppression of the Philistines, but that someone is going to be a hero, he's going to be a deliverer. He's going to come and save them from their oppressors. And my email is just going bonkers right now. Wonder if I could get that to stop making so much noise. Give me just 1 second. Let me see what I can do here with this real fast. Okay, should not be any more email sounds coming through now. I don't know if you guys can hear or not, but I'm going through. I think somebody's email server has been backed up for a long time. So I'm literally getting emails from one single source, and I've gotten like 12 in the last 2 minutes. So I don't know what the deal is, but I turned that sound off that way. Hopefully it won't distract us in our reading here in Judges 16. But remember, again, Samson is the supposed deliverer of Israel from the Philistines. And yet we see that he just doesn't live up to that there are a number of personal issues that he has. He does not display godly issues or righteous, holy. He does not display godly characteristics or righteous characteristics. He certainly does not seem to live a holy life, even though he is to live the life of a Nazirite. To this point, we've seen him break his Nazirite vow in a number of different ways, whether it be eating or drinking things from the vine, or him interacting with dead bodies, carcasses like that of the lion or of a donkey or of people. And then finally, in this chapter, we're going to see the last straw that breaks the camel's back so far as his Nazirite vow goes, and the fact that he's going to have his hair shaved. And that's really going to get him in a very unfortunate predicament, which ends up leading to his death. So let's read about that here. And again, I want to focus primarily here in chapter 16 on Yahweh and what he is doing, and really the behind the scenes activity that's taking place here. And then I'll focus more so on Samson and some other details of his story in the lesson that I want to preach tomorrow. We'll do a summary of the story of Samson as a whole, and then I want to dig into really what caused him to fail in so many ways. I want to also do some comparison and contrast between him and Jesus, because I think purposefully, according to the inspiration of Scripture, the story of Samson should cause us to think about Jesus. But we're then going to contrast what made one to be incredibly successful, and how the very opposite made the other unsuccessful. Of course, being the successful one being Jesus, the unsuccessful one being Samson. So we'll talk about all that and draw some, I think, very important lessons from the story of Samson and the life that he lived as is described to us through Scripture. So let's read here then in Judges chapter 16 and verse number 1. Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute, and went to bed with her. Then when the Gazites heard that Samson was there, they surrounded the place and waited in ambush for him that night at the city gate. They kept quiet all night, saying, "Let's wait until dawn, then we will kill him." But Samson stayed in bed only until midnight. Then he got up, took hold of the doors of the city gate along with the two gateposts, and pulled them out, bar and all. He put them on his shoulders and took them to the top of the mountain overlooking Hebron. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the Sorek Valley. Delilah, the root meaning behind that name is actually night. So we have here, should tell, if again, we don't understand these languages like they would have, but knowing that Samson means something along the lines of sun boy, then you have this night woman. There's probably going to be problems here, and that certainly ends up being the case. Verse number 5, the Philistine leaders went to her and said, "Persuade him to tell you where his great strength comes from, so we can overpower him, tie him up, and make him helpless. Each of us will then give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me, where does your great strength come from? How could someone tie you up and make you helpless?" Samson told her, "They tie me up with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried. I will become weak and be like any other man." The Philistine leaders brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried. She tied him up with them. While the men in ambush were waiting in a room, she called out to him, "Samson, the Philistines are here." But he snapped the bowstrings as a strand of yarn snaps when it touches fire. The secret of his strength remained unknown. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have mocked me and told me lies. Won't you please tell me how you can be tied up?" He told her, "If they tie me up with new ropes that have never been used, I will become weak and be like any other man." Delilah took new ropes, tied him up with them, and shouted, "Samson, the Philistines are here." But while the men in ambush were waiting in her room, he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have mocked me all along and told me lies. Tell me how you can be tied up." He told her, "If you weave the 7 braids in my head into the fabric on a loom." She fastened the braids with a pin and called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are here." He awoke from his sleep and pulled out the pin with the loom and the web. "How can you say, 'I love you,'" she told him, "when your heart is not with me? This is the 3rd time you have mocked me and not told me what makes your strength so great." Verse 16, because she nagged him day after day and pleaded with him until she wore him out, he told her the whole truth and said to her, "My hair has never been cut, because I am a Nazirite to God from birth. If I am shaved, my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man." When Delilah realized that he had told her the whole truth, she sent this message to the Philistine leaders, "Come one more time, for he has told me the whole truth." Then the Philistine leaders came to her and brought the silver with them. Then she let him fall asleep on her lap and called a man to shave off the 7 braids on his head. In this way, she made him helpless, and his strength left him. Then she cried, "Samson, the Philistines are here." When he awoke from his sleep, he said, "I will escape as I did before and shake myself free." But he did not know that Yahweh had left him. The Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles, and he was forced to grind grain in the prison. But his hair began to grow back after it had been shaved. Now the Philistine leaders gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to their god Dagon. They rejoiced and said, "Our God has handed over our enemy Samson to us." And when the people saw him, they praised their God and said, "Our God has handed over to us our enemy who destroyed our land and who multiplied our dead." When they were in good spirits, they said, "Bring Samson here to entertain us." So they brought Samson from the prison, and he entertained them. They had him stand between the pillars. Samson said to the young man who was leading him by the hand, "Lead me where I can feel the pillars supporting the temple, so I can lean against them." The temple was full of men and women. All the leaders of the Philistines were there, and about 3,000 men and women were on the roof watching Samson entertain them. He called out to Yahweh, "Yahweh God," or it should be at this point, "Lord Yahweh, please remember me. Strengthen me, God, just once more. With one act of vengeance, let me pay back the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars supporting the temple and leaned against him. one on his right hand and the other on his left. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." He pushed with all his might, and the temple fell on the leaders and all the people in it. And those he killed at his death were more than those he had killed in his life. Then his brothers and father's whole family came down, carried him back, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of his father Manoah. So he judged Israel 20 years. And that is Judges chapter 16, the conclusion of the Samson saga. All right, thinking about this text here, we see all of the really old issues with Samson continue to be true here within this text. He has problems with women. We've already noticed that. He has this prostitute that he has in the first few verses. And then we have the culminating woman in his life, Delilah, the only woman who is named up until this point. She is in cahoots with the Philistines, who have offered her just an obscene amount of money, 1,100 pieces of silver each, which would just be, again, years and years worth of wages. So she has an offer that is too good for her to refuse, and she really doesn't seem to care about Samson whatsoever. And instead of him recognizing that, he's pretty obtuse. All he cares about is what he sees and what his eyes desire. So he allows her to go through this whole song and dance of, what is the source of your strength, and telling her and lying to her about it, and then finally giving it up. And seemingly, in my mind, I'm thinking the only reason he's doing that is because he thinks that he's invincible. If I've done all these other things I shouldn't have done, then why would this be the thing that caused me to lose my strength? Well, ends up he does lose his strength because, as verse number 20 tells us, he did not know that Yahweh had left him. He did not know that Yahweh had left him. So why does Yahweh leave him? Well, number one, he's been unfaithful to the covenant, but still, he's been unfaithful to the covenant already. Why is it at this point that Yahweh leaves him? Well, I think it's for a purpose. Remember, Yahweh allowed Samson to come up for him to cause issues between the Israelites and the Philistines, that they had become far too comfortable, the Israelites had been. They had become far too comfortable in being under the oppression of the Philistines. And that was not something that Yahweh desired. So here's Samson. He's going to be the one to shake things up, to cause the issues between these two people, so that he might deliver Israel from the Philistines. Even though they had not cried out to him, God was still going to deliver them. God was still going to strike a blow to them. How does he do so, though? He does so by allowing Samson to be taken captive. And I want to note the scene that is painted once he is taken to Gaza and he's put in prison. Notice that the people of Gaza, that these Philistines, one of their chief gods was Dagon. This was the god of the harvest, and it should not surprise us that this is the god they're really focusing on, because of the fact that Samson had burned so much of their fields. Remember, that's going back to chapter 15, that he ignited the torches and released the foxes of the jackals into the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned the piles of grain and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. Major economic blow, major blow to their god in the way that they perceived reality. They believed that this God provided them grain, so for all their grain to be destroyed would be an attack against their God. So they have this great festival, they come together to offer a great sacrifice to their God because of Samson being captured, and they say, "Our God has handed over our enemy to us. Our God has handed over our enemy who destroyed our land and who multiplied our dead." This is a taunt towards the God of Samson. Well, the God of Samson, in their mind, the Israelite God Yahweh, this is a taunt toward him. And yet, we're going to see that Yahweh is going to be the one who ends up being victorious, because eventually, once all this takes place, Samson's captured, his strength is taken from him, his eyes that he's been led by his entire life are gouged out. Well, now he begins to think differently. It's no longer just about what he sees with his eyes, but what he perceives in his mind. So what he does, he cries out to Yahweh, "Lord Yahweh, please remember me. Strengthen me, God, just once more. With one act of vengeance, let me pay back the Philistines for my two eyes." So there's some humility here, but still he seems to not be entirely persuaded in taking the focus off of himself. There's still a lot of this is about him being humiliated, about his eyes being taken. He wants revenge for that, but he knows that the only one who can strengthen him in doing that is Yahweh himself. So he has to ask for Yahweh to give him the strength to do this thing, and which he does. He puts his two hands on the pillars. He pushes with all of his might. The temple ends up falling on all those who were there. Those were on the roof and within the complex. The big statement is there in verse number 30. Those he killed at his death were more than those he killed in his life. But want to notice, he died with the Philistines. And that was a very shameful thing, to die with the enemy. The way the Israelites saw and their conception of the afterlife was being buried with your family and having descendants to carry on after you. Well, he's died with the Philistines, so that's really bad, except for the fact that his family goes and gets his body, brings it back, and he's buried within Israel instead of in Philistia, which is a good ending, better than it certainly could have been. He has the opportunity now, again, in their conception of the afterlife, to continue to live on well. Text ends up saying he judged Israel 20 years. But really, again, all this is about Yahweh. It's about his people being loyal to him and drawing them back from being oppressed by the Philistines, and really being willing to assimilate with them in their pagan religious practices. So much of this gets back to what we see at the end of, or at the beginning of chapter 13. The Israelites again did what was evil in Yahweh's sight. Well, what would that be? That would be paganism. That would be idolatry. That would be a lack of covenant loyalty. Well, here is God showing through Samson that they have no power, really. That even this very flawed and bad man in many ways, I'll even use him to bring great victory against my enemies. Show faith to me, not to the pagan gods. Now, unfortunately, again, as we get into chapter 17 and 18 tomorrow, we're going to see that paganism and idolatry is still rampant within the land. Remember, this is taking place in the southwestern region of the land of Canaan. So we're going to be looking further north into Ephraim, and then later on, Dan is involved as well. So further north in Israel, they've got a lot of problems of their own. So we're going to consider those tomorrow as we read together in chapters 17 and 18. If you have any questions about what's taking place here in Samson, then maybe wait until tomorrow. Whenever I do some more talking about, I'm going to focus much more on Samson himself and his flaws in greater detail in our lesson tomorrow, looking, giving a summarization of chapters 13 through 16, and then talk more in depth about Samson himself. So maybe wait for that, or just go ahead and feel free to ask those questions. Maybe they'll give me something else to focus on within the lesson, or bring up any talking points you'd like to discuss as well. Be happy to think about that with you. I appreciate so much you reading along with me today. Hope that you will tune in again tomorrow, again, as we read in chapter 17 and 18 of Judges, where the judges are over. But unfortunately, the unfaithfulness of Israel really is just beginning in many ways. Again, summarized by chapter 17 verse 6. And in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did whatever seemed right to him. Hope you'll tune in again tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Saturday, everyone. Take care. God bless.